The talk today is going to be on XDebug. Below you see my name and my Twitter handle. If you ever write to me, please be patient. I'm not very active on Twitter. And since I saw the Social Dilemma film recently, even less. So, so the reason I'm giving a talk is not to advocate XDebug. It's just to show you some of the features out there that it can provide to you. Some people are perfectly happy not using this kind of stuff. They like their var dumps, dies, and that kind of thing. Personally, for me, as you touched before, if you are on legacy code, it's actually quite helpful to just navigate through the code, and it takes you to different files and stuff like that, and for many other reasons. So what is XDebug? So XDebug was developed by this guy called Dirk Rithens. I'm not sure if I spelled that right. And it was developed in C, and you can find it open source in GitHub. It allows you to do loads of stuff. That's why I put var dump on steroids, because among many other things, is a single step debugger, so you can easily examine data structures. You can walk through your code, and it allows you to do so many of that stuff that you usually output via var dumps and stuff like that. Not to mention, none of this stuff gets written into your code base, so it's less prone to having this sort of commands that people stick in there and then forget to raise. It allows you to debug, to interact with the debug console. I'll touch on this later on because it's quite cool. And another thing that it does is it shows you the full stack trace. So in other words, whenever you set up a breakpoint, it tells you exactly how you got there, what functions and methods were called until you reach to that breakpoint or error. So why some people do not adopt XDebug, and I've been through this road, and I'm pretty sure loads of people have. Sometimes they just cannot make it work. This talk, because it's a lightning talk, is not going to be very in-depth in how to install it. That will require a longer talk, but I will talk you through the process that I find the easiest to install it on a Mac, and also show you how to install it on a Linux machine. So one of the things that happened recently, since 2018, is that you can no longer install XDebug via package managers like Brew. You can only install it via PECL. And that means that where you used to have, centralized PHP and extension set of libraries in your machine, you have to sort of divide it between these two. That said, though, I run on a macOS Catalina, which already comes with PHP, but it lacks the PECL extension. So the easiest thing, the first thing I recommend doing, and the easiest thing, is that you install PHP via Brew. And the reason for that is that it installs a lot of extensions for you, including PECL. So if you install your PHP via Brew, you get that you get that straight away, and then it makes your life easier installing XDebug. So installing PHP via Homebrew, you just open your terminal, run brew install PHP, and it'll show you at the end of the installation process a set of commands and steps you need to go through, which I'll show you in a sec. And then after you do that, you run PECL install XDebug, which PECL is already installed with Brew, and there you go, you're done. You just need to configure XDebug after that. This is the output you get when you install PHP via Brew. What you have to do here, if you're running a Mac, is you need to point the PHP of your machine to use the Brew version instead of the one that comes with Mac OS. And to do that, you open your httpd-conf file and look for the line that loads the PHP module. Replace that for this handy line that gets outputted after you install PHP via Brew. Make sure index.php is under the directory index, so accept that PHP file. And after you've done all these steps that are shown over here, you restart Apache, and that's it. You've got PHP running on your local machine via Brew. There's other benefits of doing it via Homebrew, which I'll point in a second too. You can also install XDebug directly from the repository in GitHub. This repository has a bash file called rebuild.sh, which after you run it, it'll run through the steps to install XDebug on your computer. With Windows, it's a bit more involved, and I encourage you to look at some tutorials out there. The XDebug website is pretty good at explaining how to install it in Windows, so I'll let you do that piece of work because I've not used Windows for ages. Configuring XDebug. So once you've got XDebug installed, the first thing you have to do is you need to edit your php.ini file. So run that php-ini command and it will give you a list of where your php-ini file is installed. Then once you figure that out, you open that file and you add these lines below that are under the XDebug section here. Be aware though that sometimes when you install PHP via Brew, it adds this send extension right at the top with an empty string. Just delete that and add this XDebug section at the bottom. The commands here are basically the send extension is to install the send API. The remote enable just enables XDebug for you. Auto starts basically means it's going to start listening for incoming requests, so that when you reload your browser, it'll start listening to that and run XDebug on top. And the remote port, usually it's 9000. I just put it there anyway, but by default, it's usually IDEs and XDebugs are all going to run on port 9000. Once you've edited your php.ini file, you restart Apache again, and this essentially will get you set up with PHP and XDebug on your computer. And to verify that, just run a php version and make sure that the line send in the engine with XDebug is displaying in the screen. Another way to see this is just if you run php info, you'll see a bunch of XDebug configuration there if you've got it installed correctly. The other reason I wanted to mention before why I recommend installing PHP via Brew is that it makes switching PHP versions really easily. And by switching PHP versions, you also need to repeat the process of adding the XDebug configuration to each of the php.ini files that you install. So for example, if you install PHP 7.3, but your Mac comes with 7.4, you just you force link it to the PHP 7.3 version and link it from 7.4. Is that easy? Just make sure that you edit your ini file afterwards on PHP 7.3. It's a bit more involved if you follow the process. I just found this the easiest. And also, just make sure you restart the web server all the time. Can't tell you how many times that has cost me. So another thing I'm going to explain you is how to use XDebug with VS Code. I've used XDebug with other IDEs like PHP Storm. It follows, I mean, once you know how it works on one IDE, the other IDEs is sort of self-explanatory because they all seem to have the same configuration. So in XDebug, you have to go to the extension tab and look for the debug extension. Once you find it, you just install it, and that sets the XDebug extension on your IDE. It's as simple as that. So once you've got this extension installed, you have to set a configuration file for PHP. So you're going to run add configuration and then choose PHP from the list, and it sets this up automatically for you. And most of the time, you don't have to touch any of this code. It'll just work straight away. I say that, but we'll see in a minute why you would need to edit this stuff a little bit. Once you set up this PHP configuration, you get a launch.json file on your VS Code folder, and that's where this configuration is stored, just in case you wonder where this is. One of the things, if you use local environments with virtual machines, Orlando, DDEV, this sort of thing, one of the settings you need to set is path mappings. This is pretty much the same on PHP Storm as it is on VS Code. Basically, what you're going to say is you're going to map your virtual environment doc root to the current doc root. So app web would be the environment you SSH into when you load any of these local environments, and where that doc root is located inside there. Usually is app/web, could be app/doc root, it could be any of these other folders. Just make sure that wherever your doc root is in these environments, it maps to the current doc root. And there's a handy variable there, workspace root, which will do most of the job for your local paths. And then just add /web, which in my case, my doc root is in /web. The other thing that path mappings does is it tells you where you want XDebug to debug, basically. So for example, if you have this huge monolithic app and you only want to debug certain part of that app, you can change the path mapping. You can point, that doesn't necessarily have to be the doc root. It can be a folder inside that doc root that you only want to debug. So it'll save a bit of performance on your machine if you do it that way. So these are for VS Code. These are the settings that tend to work if you use that sort of DDEV Lambda or anything like that. Stuff that you can do with XDebug, as I pointed out before, is a single step debugger. So you can step into, step out to restart code, that sort of thing. You can inspect your variables and methods and see what they're returning, make sure that is behaving the way you want to, usually the kind of stuff that you do with the var dump. You can modify properties and values live, and that is pretty useful. I'll show you an example of that in a second. You can add conditional breakpoints, which helps a tremendous lot if you have to traverse through large amounts of data and you just want to break points to a particular location. And you can use the debug console, which I'll also explain to you in a sec, which lets you interact with your code and play with it with values and changing it and seeing what methods are returning what. And you can call actually any method on the debug console. You'll see that in a sec. So here, what I have is a basic app. It's basically a album, to put it that way. It just has 3 entries in it with a title, an author for a song, an album name, and whether it's published or not. And what I'm going to show you is how to play with XDebug and VS Code so that you can see what features this has. There's a handy shortcut on VS Code. It's Command-Shift-D, which will get you into the debugging panel. And there's 2 types of debugging. You can listen for XDebug. If you're using a web browser, this is the one you want to go for. If you just want to debug your script directly without using a web browser, you can change it to listen to the current script. So I'm going to change it here to just listen to the app script, and I'm just going to set a breakpoint, and hopefully this will work. One thing you have to do is just click on this play button, and once you've done that, as you can see here, the code stops where my breakpoint is. And you have some handy stuff for here. You can see what local environments are present, what super globals I can use, and if I find any constants here. You can watch for variables. We'll see some of that stuff soon. You can see the call stack is not interesting right now because I'm on the main app. And you can see the breakpoints here. So with the breakpoints, you can break on everything, only on exceptions, errors, warnings, notices. So it's quite flexible where you break in that regards. There's these, this panel here allows you to step through your code. So I can basically say, okay, I want to step into set album. Sorry for the talk, because it was all about not using setters, but I'm afraid this code was done previously to that, so apologies. So, but you can step into the code and see how the function works and step out of the code. And if you want to go back to where you were, you can actually launch a new session of a new debug session to automatically start running the script from scratch. And whenever you want to stop debugging, you just click the stop button and you're set. Pretty straightforward. That is one of the benefits of why I don't use power dampened files, is just you can just really walk through it and see. And also if you have you know, classes upon classes upon classes, you can navigate through it quite easily, and instead of having to look for where things are located. So one of the other properties, let me just bring my presentation here so I can go into a sort of order manner. Just a sec. Okay, so one of the things I talked to you is inspecting variables. So if I relaunch the code here and I want to see, oh, I've got this thing from the Hangout right where this is. Sorry about that. I'm not able to reach. Ah, man. There you go. Right. So if you want to watch a particular variable, you can just place the variable name here. And as you can see, it's not very useful because you've got it under the local variables, but you can actually watch for a particular method on that variable. So if I want to see the author, I can go get author, and you know, I can watch for what this variable is at any point in time in my code, which is quite handy to track any bugs whenever a method is not returning whatever you expect. Another thing you can do with here is you can set up conditional breakpoints. So for example, there's an array of 3 elements over here, and I only want to breakpoint whenever the author of the album is Queen. This basically is a Boolean expression. So you can set any expression here that returns true or false that works with your code. But if you set it that way, and I enable this, and I run the script again, if you see my local variables here, when I'm under the song, I'm directly under Queen. I'm not under John Lennon. And skip the first one, it just got me to wherever I wanted to break in that particular array. That's very handy too. There's something that is called the debug console. Now this is actually quite handy because as of with watch, you can, while watch will persist your variable, here you can call any sort of method that you want. And actually one thing that is quite useful is that you can change your code live and it will be reflected, as you'll see later on in your environment, in your local environment, straight away, as if you persisted this data in your database. And that's very useful. So for example, at the moment, I'm under the second element of this array, which is a Queen song, Bohemian Rhapsody. And let's say I want to change it to, I don't know, greatest hits. I'm not sure if they have that, but say I want to change that. As you can see here, the album if changed to greatest hits. And if I finish running my code, I have a print here, which basically executes what should be sent live to my app. And as you can see here, it's sending greatest hits as the album for Queen. And the benefit of this, as you can see, I'll show you afterwards, is that, for example, if you're a front-end developer and you would like to see how your site looks without a sidebar, you can do so by adjusting your variables and playing around with it here without persisting it and see what the end result will be. Another useful thing you can do with this is, for example, I touched before on breakpoints. So you can stop on particular errors in your code, whether it's notices, warnings, or errors. So if you get an error or a warning and you want to know, okay, at what point in the code is that warning triggered, you can say, okay, stop wherever a warning is. And if I run this again, it'll automatically stop on my defined warning here. And it's a quick way actually to see in your app. I mean, it's obviously going to be a lot bigger than this, where warnings are triggered or even notices. So that's quite handy. The other thing I wanted to touch on now is the stack trace. So sorry, the call stack. If I run the code here, wait, let's just get rid of that. Okay, I'm just going to hide this. If I run the code here and I step into this class, which is the song class, immediately you see that we went from the main class, which is the app, into the song. So if any error happened over here, you know straight away what happened until the point I got to this error in the code. This method was called from the main app, and it then took me into this class. Obviously, if you're working on a bigger app, this is going to be like 10, 20 lines of functions, but you can see where I'm going, where you can actually have a history of what methods were called all the way up until you got into your break point or your error. So you can see, okay, I'll just put a breakpoint on any of these other methods that took me here and see what variables are there and inspect them. As I mentioned before, there is the useful stuff of the debug console is that you can output stuff live as if it was persisted. So I'm just going to bring this over here real quick. So this is, for example, the output of my app in HTML. Let's put it that way. And let's say, hey, I want to see what does this like look without the sidebar. So in my code here, I've got an index.php, and I've got a variable sidebar here. When if it's truthy, it'll display a sidebar. If it's falsy, it won't. So I can set up a breakpoint at this point. Let's just make sure I don't have one there. And if I run this code, I'll go back here. I'm at this point where it hasn't rendered the page yet. This is from the previous render, but as I can inspect from my local variables, the sidebar currently is set to true. So if I go to the debug console, I say sidebar equals false, and it set it to false. What will happen when I finish this? Okay. Somehow it's not letting me. Let me run this again. Right. Right. Okay. As I mentioned before, if you want to listen for incoming requests, you have to change it to listen for XDebug here rather than the current script. So that's my bad. If now I reload my page and I've got my breakpoint there. Right. Cool. If I reload the page, there you go. Now my sidebar, as you can see, is set to true. I set it to false. Oops. And you can see here it's set to false. If I finish running my code, please do so now. This is the problem with that live demos. Sometimes it plays tricks on you. So if I set it to false, as you can see here, it literally hit my sidebar. So you can see the potential of changing the output of your app live with changing the different values of these variables. And those are pretty much most of the features I want to introduce you in this lightning talk for XDebug. There's a lot of stuff you can configure in XDebug on your PHP INI to make it more performance, to allow us for more nesting, more memory, stuff like that. I'm afraid there's not a lot of time on this session to talk about that, but hey, yeah, that's I hope you find it useful to install XDebug and debug your code from here on. And ping me on Twitter if you find any issues, and I'll try and help you out with that. Do you have any questions so far for this? As of interest, how many of you guys use XDebug? Do you use XDebug at all?
I have used XDebug. I find it quite, it's like a good thing for a PHP developer's arsenal in their tool set. But at the moment currently using Docker within the production, well, as in my local development. So that's something I'm interested in to get integrated into inside a Docker container.
Okay.
So yeah, that definitely will be something I'll be looking into. I do use Windows, unfortunately. I have bought a PC, but I was going to convert it to Linux, which Linux would have been the better option. But yeah, that was a good talk. I found that very fascinating. Thanks.
Cheers.
Yes, I tend to use it for, I do reach for var dump and die or something every so often, but for some more complex stuff, I will XDebug it.
Cool. Some local environments and that come to my mind, Lando and DDev, if you use recipes for them, I think they call it recipes on both, maybe not in DDev, they already come with some XDebug extension set for you, so you don't actually have to touch anything there. You just on your mill file, just make sure you set your XDebug to true, and most of the work is done there for you. If you use Docker, you might want to play around with the path mappings, make sure those are correct, and they're pointing to the right locations.
Yeah, definitely. That's very insightful talk.
I think DDev, you can literally just run DDev XDebug on, and it'll enable everything in PHP.
That would be awesome. That's quite cool.
I know Derek has done some streams with Matt Stauffer and with Gary as well. So I've put some links to Matt's talks in the Slack channel. I can't find Gary's one right now, but they've gone through different setups. They've done Laravel Ballet, and they've done like a Docker-based one. So there's a few of them. If I can find Gary's one, I'll post it in there as well. Yeah, Gary's also a big advocate of XDebug.
Cool.
Any more questions, anybody? There's nothing in Slack that I can see. So again, feel free to unmute if you want to ask a question. Going once. Okay.
I've got one question, sorry.
Oh, go on. Yeah, go on, James.
Yeah. So basically, I know you said about sometimes you are right about the call stack when you're trying to sort of use XDebug within a Laravel application. If by the time it gets to your start point, the call stack is actually quite big.
Yeah.
Is it that feature that you mentioned to sort of listen out on that one class? Have you ever used that within a Laravel application before?
I'm afraid I've not programmed on Laravel applications so far. I'm not sure what your question was with regards to stack trace. Call stack, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry for the English sometimes.
No, it's fine. It's fine. You mentioned that you can switch the listen for XDebug and you can listen out for a particular part in the break. So you just so if you wanted to listen in that one file only, is it that's quite useful that was quite useful. So I'm just wondering if you ever used that within a big sort of code, a big application which had a big code base.
Right. Yeah, I understand your question. Usually, no, because the problem is if once you bootstrap your application, it's sometimes hard to figure out that you want to run particularly that script without. So, for example, if you're running this script inside, I don't know, a module you created or whatever, and you don't bootstrap your application that way via the run command, it sometimes doesn't figure that out quite very well. So in those cases, I tend to use the browser, which is much more trustworthy. If that helps you.
Yeah, thanks. It does.
Usually it is quite useful for tests. If you're running some tests on your site, that actually does work quite well, I have found.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely use it for that.
All right, thanks. Awesome.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, thanks to both of our guest speakers this evening. It's been great having people coming, attending these meetups and going to talk to these meetups throughout the the COVID situation. So yeah, it's been fantastic. Thank you both again.